Hello, everyone. Please continue eating if you have not finished. We'll get ready to start our program in just a minute. My name is Judy Lehman. I'm president, and I want to welcome you all. And with that, I will turn the program over to Dennis.
Thank you, Judy. Since we're all interested in elections and how elections get handled, we actually have people who are those behind-the-scenes people who run the candidates, run the campaigns. I know a lot of our questions are similar to the things that they deal with. If we're trying to reach voters, what's the most effective way? How do you divide your money between traditional and social media? Does anybody respond to social media? I thought this would be fun to run this like a candidates forum so campaign managers can get a little taste of it. So it's very structured. We'll have an opening statements of 3 minutes where they'll describe themselves, how they got into politics. Then after the opening statements, we will be starting with Adam, and we'll just go down the row responding to the questions, and then we will rotate who goes first, and then continuing going down the row and then back to Adam. We are very fortunate to have all of these experienced people who have been campaigning through Monterey County. One of the things I've noticed in organizing candidate forums is that I'm talking more and more to campaign managers and campaign managers who are from out of town. And here we wanted to get some locals. We have Adam Pinneretz, Omar Perez, Valerie Guardiola, and Alex Hulanicki. So Adam, why don't you introduce yourself and talk about your background for the next 3 minutes.
So thank you for that introduction. My name's Adam Pinteritz. I'm going to just start with a very brief anecdote. What got me first engaged civically and in politics was when I was in high school. I had a history teacher who gave us the real version of history, didn't, sugarcoat anything. And he got in a little bit of trouble over that and was up in front of the Board of Education and was quite possibly losing his job. So myself and a few dozen other students went before the board and during public comments spoke about how this was our favorite teacher. We learned so much from him about the real history of the United States and the world. And they went ahead and fired him anyway. And this was a largely political decision because, they didn't like what he was teaching. So that's when I realized that we have excellent mentors and excellent leaders in our communities, but they're often either not allowed to come into positions of power or influence or outright kicked out. And so that made me realize as a student early on that I wanted to be part of empowering communities and empowering community leaders to be in positions where they could affect change. So that led me to studying communications here at CSU Monterey Bay, and that's what brought me here to the area about 10 years ago. I've been a community organizer and campaign manager pretty much ever since. I've also worked for the California State Assembly and served on a number of local boards, most recently elected to the Women's March Board for Monterey Bay. So that's just the short version. I've campaigned primarily here in Monterey County, but also in San Francisco, in West Virginia, in North Dakota. So I've gotten a look at both how we campaign and how politics operate here locally, but I've also seen how it's different in other parts of the country. And I think it's important for us to remain cognizant of that, especially in this particular election year where the national picture matters so much. So with that, I'll hand it over to Omar.
Hi, can you hear me? Okay, bet, nice. My name is Omar, thank you for having us. I'm a resident of Salinas, born and raised East Salinas, and just growing up in that area, you learn really quickly that politics is a way to get things done and really empower the community. I grew up with a lot of friends who weren't fortunate, and so that drove me to study psychology, completely different than politics. I went to UCSC, got my BA in psychology, and right after college, got involved with Congressman Sanfar's office and interned there, and got the political bug and fell in love and started campaigning around 2011, and been campaigning since, and pursued a master's degree in political psychology to better understand what goes on in people's heads when they vote. It's quite interesting. It's quite interesting irrational behavior. And, and so, yeah, I've worked on numerous campaigns in this area, most notably Congressman Panetta's campaign in 2016. And with that, I'll pass it on to Valerie.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having us here today. My name is Valerie. I've been working with PFW Consulting, which is Plasha Will's consulting firm, for about 10 years. I started with Plasha directly out of high school, actually, which was very lucky for me, and I've been working with her ever since. I've worked Congressman Farr's campaign up until he retired, and then immediately switched over to Congressman Jimmy Panetta's campaign, where I met Omar, obviously. Since then, we've had the honor of working Assembly Member Mark Stone's campaign, who's just a wonderful, ideal politician and ideal Assembly member. Since then, we've sort of wavered in and out of politics, and most recently we're working on nonprofit organizations and in the private sector as well. Outside of that, though, I definitely got into politics at a very, very young age, probably with my first letter to the president complaining about my elementary school bathrooms. So since then, I've definitely evolved in my way of getting in contact with government entities, but it's definitely been a passion and a drive in me from a very young age, and I thank you guys for letting me be here.
Thank you, Valerie. Thank you, Valerie. And I have a question. Did you get a response from the president on the federal issue?
I did not. I went to the school board after that.
So all politics is local, and I'm probably the most apolitical person in the room because I was a newspaper reporter for 22 years, and I was with the Herald, and I had to cover everybody from Clint Eastwood. Loretta Fisher and I were going down back alleys in Carmel in 1986, trying to find the people who weren't living there, but they were registering in Carmel to vote for. And I was the one reporting Loretta's, let's say, nocturnal activities. So there's just some objectivity there, and I rode sports all the way through college, and that paved my way. I was able to double major in communication and political sociology because I would be covering politics as a reporter and news. And so I started in Peninsula Life on the women's pages, what they call the society section. And went from there to I was dancing with words, and then I got to walk with words, learning how to walk in terms of trying to get the people to understand crime, politics, and society, government, local government, education, all of the beats, everything but water. I left the Herald in 1997, went to Japan for 3 years, taught at a college there. I teach at Monterey Peninsula College critical thinking and journalism. And when I came back from Japan in 2001, I met a friend on the street, and he said, well, you should go call the people in Watsonville. They need some help. And I worked on my first election in Watsonville at the Paro Valley Water Management Agency on a not a tax, but a supplemental fee on water bills. It was alleged to be a tax by people who lost in that election. We won, the agency won, went to appeal courts, and finally was overturned. So I don't know whether I should call that a win or a loss. But then I went from there to the Monterey County Water Resources Agency as a contractor to put out the materials and run the election for the Salinas Valley Water Project. And I've been in some water issues and land issues. Janet Brennan's out there, Beverly Bean's out there. We've all been at battle or allied in some way for many years. And that's where I am at 15 seconds to go, but I went from issues to candidates in 2008, and I've run over 20 campaigns, including Casey Lucius's campaign against Jimmy Panetta that was against Sam far before Jimmy got in, and then I set up the election, her campaign, and then we parted ways.
Okay, now we're going to go through the questions. It'll be 1-minute responses at the end. After all 4 people have spoken, if you want to jump in there and make another comment, go ahead. We have another microphone there. So we'll start with Adam, and then we go to Omar, Valerie, and Alex. Has social media reduced the need for television and newspaper advertising?
Well, I think the answer to this question is a little bit different depending on which parts of the country you're in. In some parts of the country, people are still very heavily invested in TV advertising in particular, and more traditional media in general. But I do think, generally speaking, that social media is on the rise. It is increasingly a part of campaigns' budgets. But I wouldn't say that necessarily it's going to replace traditional media. I think what's really happening is that campaigns are needing to raise more and more money to be paying for both social media and traditional media advertising.
Yeah, and I have to agree with Adam. It varies from area to area, and from a psychological perspective, social media is great. It creates data points that we can track and we can analyze and help with building out issues, messaging, and really understanding what's important in the community. So I think it's increasing in the campaign budget because it's becoming such a vital tool in really understanding the community and constituents as a whole.
I would also have to agree. Especially within Monterey County, you see a high demographic of over 50 voters. And because of that, those are demographics that are more likely to read the newspaper and have access to the television versus Facebook or Instagram or any other sort of social media. That being said, though, the price points for social media advertising are much, much lower than television or newspapers, and therefore campaigns are trying to make more of an impact there simply because of budget means.
I've always had the impression that newspaper advertising was important, coming from the newspaper background, but as things have changed, it's a battle for eyeballs. In terms of lower circulation for newspapers, even though they do have websites, they do get clicks on their websites, but when you really want to narrow your messaging and your audience, you basically have, social media has become a very good tool to use. And including direct marketing and direct mailing or every door mailing to specific neighborhoods. Newspaper advertising, used to be quite a good staple among campaigners, but it is really dropped off the map. And the last point of that is that you really, most important is you have to meet the voter and knock on the door and ask for the vote.
Next question is, with vote-by-mail ballots going out a month in advance, is this date the new focal point of a campaign to have all of your material out by then, or do you still point your efforts to Election Day? I ask this question because we are always wrestling with when should we have our candidates forums. So, I'm sorry, yes, Omar, and then Omar, Valerie, Alex, and then Adam.
Yeah, I don't think it's replacing Election Day. I think it's important to understand that it pushes back everything a little bit, but it's not really necessarily replacing the focal point. You want to get people early on when they vote, but you also understand that there is a large majority of people that still go to the voting booth. They still go on Election Day, and it's important to target those people as well and make sure that they're getting all the materials and the messaging out at the same time. But yeah, I think it's not necessarily replacing it, but creating two different timelines?
Yeah, I would say it's about 50-50. You want to reach your voters early on, and I don't remember exactly what percentage in Monterey County it is, but it is a very high percentage which votes by mail. And because of that, you want to have everything in the mail even before vote by mail. So you want to either come with it or come a couple days afterwards as far as personal mailings go, any brochures or any postcards that you put in the mail. It is a focus for campaigns to really focus on those two key dates, which is May 7th and then obviously Election Day. Outside of that, the Get Out the Vote Week is just as equally important, I think, leading right up to when people would be going to the elections offices and all of their polling places. So.
I was on the phone in the parking lot with the printer talking about our scheduling. Obviously, May 7th, May 8th, May 9th are key dates to have your literature dropped with the ballots that on vote by mail. Monterey County, as I recall, was about 60% to 70% vote by mail. And unfortunately, a lot of those vote by permanent absentee voters are actually holding on to their ballots and turning them in on election day, showing up at the polls, turning them in, or even mailing in a ballot and then showing up and casting a provisional ballot, which is why it takes about 3 weeks to certify the election. Indeed, you should have forums. I've already had 2 forums in Santa Cruz County before filing was even closed. Labor unions are holding their forums.
Yeah, I would agree with most of what you've heard already, and what I would add to it is that, candidly, it tilts things in favor, in my opinion, of better funded and more well-organized candidates, especially for a first-time candidate who may not have run a campaign before. They may not understand how incredibly significant the vote by mail is, especially in this area, and they may be sending their message out too late as a result. Whereas a well-organized, well-financed campaign is going to know that they need to get their literature and do their phone calls and their door knocks to the vote-by-mail voters first, and then they have almost an entire month to reach the poll voters. And as was mentioned, yes, plenty of vote-by-mail folks do hang on to their ballots until close to Election Day.
I'm going to read this, it's a little provocative, just as it is. It is, and in some ways following up on what Adam just said, which actually was this nice pitch for hiring a veteran campaign manager. To say nothing of when Valerie referenced the demographics in Monterey County, other than Jenny, she must have been just looking at the over 55 crowd that we have here. All right. Valerie, do you consider it a problem that one with a lot of money can amplify his or her views beyond one candidate who does not? Should anything be done about this?
Yes, actually, I do feel that that is a huge issue in politics today, obviously on the national level and then at the local level. Campaign contribution limits are an issue. And you see that within the county, and actually I believe the Board of Supervisors is actually working towards ordinances that would limit how much individuals can give at any local level. Yeah, it is an issue, and it definitely does play out in the result of elections, because it's not just how much money campaigns can raise, but it's almost also how much they have to spend to succeed. You have yard signs that cost money. You have the big 4-foot by 8-foot signs that cost money. Mailings and brochures, TV time, radio time, everything costs money, and because of that, you have to raise a lot of money.
Thank you. Yes, you had an opponent one time that had got $350,000 from one household, I think it was, against Dave Potter. And so labor picketed that house. Earned media is how you might fight back in terms of getting newspaper coverage, TV coverage, radio coverage of your own campaign, but also about the differences between your candidate and the other candidates in the election. emphasizing that there may be a well-funded campaign, and why should it be that you buy an election? Right now, I'm working on a campaign in Santa Cruz County where they limit the contributions of individuals to $400 and to PACs to $1,000. It's the anti-campaign manager movement up there.
Yeah, I think if there was anything that I'd love to see in my lifetime, it would be Citizens United overturned. And as much as when I'm on a campaign, my objective is to win. That's what I do as a job. But more broadly, I see my job and a life goal of mine to empower communities and empower voters to the point where I work myself out of a job, to where there are citizens engaged enough on a grassroots level all across the country that professionals like myself may be no longer needed one day. But for the time being, I think it's important that, yes, in order for a grassroots campaign to beat, let's say, a more interests-funded campaign, to speak broadly, it does take us reaching into our pockets and putting forth the money to elect candidates, based on our values.
Yeah, so campaign finance is a huge deal. I think I personally think it's a problem. It limits the voice of the community. Someone coming from East Salinas, where most people don't have a lot of money to contribute to a campaign, their voices get stifled when coming across other well-funded campaigns. But again, as somebody who works in campaigns, things do cost money, and it's important to find ways to empower that community and give them that voice and the economic incentive to donate to a candidate. It's really bridging that gap to allow them to understand that their money can go to funding a door sign or a yard sign or putting a mailer in somebody's mailbox, so that their candidate and their message gets put out there instead of the opponent.
My first individual campaign was for Hardknott College Governing Board. It was an open seat there, and we spent $10,000 compared to the opponent's $40,000, and won because my client, Patricia Donahue, wore out 3 pairs of shoes, and she walked and walked and walked, and met the people. She had got people to walk with her, and she asked for the vote. And in terms of say, like on a federal level, 20th Congressional District, the challenger, Casey Lucius, to Sam Farr, didn't have a well-funded campaign, wasn't going to be funded by the local Republicans nor the national. And when Jimmy jumped in, $1.2 million sprung up overnight.
Well, when you made that reference, Alex, about picketing the opponent's house, I think I saw Loretta Fisher write that down. So, okay. Here's a practical question. If you want to run in 2020, when should you get a campaign manager?
For which seat? You mean?
Does anyone want to reveal themselves on that? Oh, okay. How about Board of Supervisors?
Yeah, Board of Supervisors 2020, 2 seats available. Now, in Monterey County, because they're never going to pass that campaign contribution limit. It was brought up by Dave Potter, in fact, and they like to be reelected.
Yeah, for a Board of Supervisors race, if they wanted to put forth a serious challenge and really manage a robust campaign, then I would recommend hiring a campaign manager no later than mid-2019, and possibly earlier than that if they wanted to establish an early lead. But it does come down to a difference in levels, right? If you're running for city council or school board, frankly, you just don't need as much lead time. Whereas, yeah, the higher office you're running for, anyone planning on running for Congress in 2020 should have started already about a year ago at least.
Yeah, I'd have to second that. It really just depends on the seat and the level of government. For Board of Supervisors, if you, mid-2019 is cutting it close. But
There's a primary, June.
yeah. And so you would want, for city council, you can go as late as a few months out from the election and still hold a good chance of winning. It just really depends on the level of government.
No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, I'd have to echo. I'd have to echo what Adam and Omar said. Mid 2019, if not earlier. Most Board of Supervisor seats are won in June because there's only 2 opponents, and they don't usually go to November. And because of that, you want to start as early as possible. But then again, you also don't want to get clumped in with the 2018 races or. And actually, there's nothing on the 2019 ballots anymore because they switched everything over to the even years. So you're good on that end.
How do you choose your candidates or issues? Do you only work for those you agree with or support? Have you ever turned anybody down? Don't have to name names.
I'll go with an anecdote on this one. As a self-proclaimed, very liberal, progressive individual in terms of my personal politics, I've often had to set that aside. The most difficult time was in 2014 when I was in West Virginia working for Congressman Nick Rahall's re-election campaign. And one of the talking points I had was, he's endorsed by the NRA. And that hurt inside to say to people, but that was a winning talking point in that district. So absolutely, as a professional campaign person, I've had to compromise my own personal politics. And the way I've made that decision has always been, well, what is the alternative? Who is the opponent? And who, ultimately, who is the best person for this district, even if I don't agree with everything they say?
Yeah, and I kind of have to second that. The way I go into it, I have my own personal politics, but it comes down to who's going to best represent that area and those constituents in that community. That person may not be the person I would vote for, but if that community really feels strongly about certain issues and that candidate is strong on those issues and can represent that constituency as the best way possible, then that's the right person for the job, because ultimately we're a democracy, and democracy comes down to representation of the community. And so that's how I normally choose my candidates.
I think I've been very lucky, actually, as far as my political stance goes. I am also very liberal, pretty left-leaning, and I grew up in Monterey County, so a lot of the issues that we see in politics are very, very close to my heart. I've been lucky enough to work for individuals who politically are the same as me, who believe the same things that I believe. Personally, sometimes, I don't get along with candidates, and you meet someone the first time and they're amazing, and then you realize later on in the campaign that, very candidly, they're kind of a nightmare. But you work with that for the better of the community, and you realize that once they do get into office, once you do help them get elected, that they do make a difference in the community.
Let's see, mergers, acquisitions, dissolutions. That's MAD for short, an acronym. Yes, it is like marrying a candidate, but you have to have that honeymoon period. You have to vet the candidate, the client. You may have to put aside your own political leanings. I am actually a political, fiscal conservative, I'd say, and definitely a social liberal. And I've had people who have been way conservative, and I won't name any parties, but I urged them not to be an R and be a non-preference representative. And sometimes they will be moderate and go to the center, and sometimes they'll just go way to the right, and I have to go way to the left and say bye-bye.
Sorry, I forgot to add a bit of context. The candidate in West Virginia was also endorsed by the unions, and the opponent was backed by the Koch brothers. So that was a tough choice between lesser evils.
How much does it cost to retain a campaign manager?
It depends on the the seat and the amount of work. Work can vary for campaigns. It's like any campaign manager or person offering a professional service. Your service can vary depending on the need of the client or the candidate. So it can vary from a couple $100 to thousands and thousands of dollars. It just really depends on the scope of work and the amount of area you're trying to cover in a campaign.
Yeah, I would echo that. It really just depends on who the person is and what the district is. And also what aspects as a campaign manager, as a campaign worker that you want to put in your contract. You can have a contract for just field, you can have a contract for just fundraising, you can have a contract for all across the board. So it really just depends on what you're looking for when you're looking for it. If it's a very fast-paced campaign, if you're starting 3 months out instead of a year out, that also might vary.
I try to get the money up front. Yeah, there are times when you are working almost as a startup in terms of, and that as you get to the primary, you're in the IPO phase, but there are various funding levels, and I think I've worked for pennies for many hours on the congressional campaign, but on the local campaigns. There's pretty much a set fee. There wasn't, as much time commitment. I find that working for public agencies, when I did the three agency campaigns, I was paid by the hour on a not-to-exceed contract, and that was the best of all worlds. But that was way in the past. So now I have to go mano a mano.
I've donated my time as a campaign manager. I had to really like the guy or the person for that. I once took a campaign field director position for $3,500 a month, but when I did the math with the hours I was working, that came out to about $4.30 an hour, because the hours on campaign work are very long. So it varies greatly. I think it helps to find a campaign manager who is passionate about the cause. And generally, you'll get a better price that way. But at the same time, I've always questioned that principally, if somebody's passionate about it, shouldn't they be putting forth better quality work and be compensated better for that? So, I've heard people often, I've heard people expect me to work for them for free. And I think realistically, professional campaign work is worth paying for.
Yeah, I just want to add, I want to echo what Adam said, actually. As a campaign manager, you really do have to know your worth. And you also should never do the math, because you are working, you are working 10 times more hours than is even feasible for a normal human being. So.
Somebody likes to ask provocative questions. Is fake news a valid campaign tool? Please explain.
I would say no. I would also say that any sort of slander against your opponent is not a tool that I am comfortable with. It's never a tool that you should ever be comfortable with. Running positive campaigns is sort of a benchmark for me. I don't run negative campaigns, just plain and simple.
I 100% agree with Valerie, and indeed, I've had some instances where I've gone and investigated some claims and those rumors that Dennis talked about earlier, and actually had the heart-to-heart talks with the client in terms of saying, "Don't do this." And that was as a consultant. I wasn't the campaign manager. And I thought I had an agreement. Let's not run a negative commercial. Let's not send a negative letter out. And 20 minutes later, they had approved the negative letter, and it's unfortunate. You have to have ethics, and it's hard to believe, isn't it, that there are ethics in politics the way things are going now, but there are.
Yeah, I would agree. It's never worthwhile running a negative campaign. And I've had campaigns where a lot of attack ads were thrown at us on every commercial break on TV. And we made the mistake of responding to those. And we ended up spending our entire time on the campaign trying to debunk all the false things that were said about our candidate rather than putting forth our own positive message. So my takeaway from that is ignore the fake news, don't disregard it, don't validate it. Instead, continue putting forth and pushing harder and harder with a strong positive message, particularly on social media. The more you comment, even if you're commenting in disagreement with fake news or with an attack, those comments are increasing the visibility of that social media post. And so you're literally handing them what they want, which is attention.
Yeah, and I just have to echo what everybody's saying. Fake news is a problem. Negative campaigns, it doesn't fly here in Monterey County. At least it's frowned upon on a psychological level. They're really, really powerful. Politics is really driven by emotions, less about rationality and facts. So what fake news does is hook you in by appealing to your anger and your strong emotions, your really instinctual emotions, and perpetuating that message really boggles down the system and doesn't let the clear facts show up in social media and the media, and prevents a really insightful dialogue between candidates.
What do you think the impact on campaigns would be if they were publicly funded?
Publicly funded in terms of you level the playing field, everybody has the same amount of money to play with. Go for it. I love that idea. You know, then you're not going to have you're not going to have fundraising aspects of it. You're not going to have the big money or independent expenditures that can sway voters, or but in some ways will be negative. Let's make it all public. And then how about shortening the campaign duration? And how about, as they do in Japan, you have a board where you can put up your poster, and you don't put them on lawns or streets. Of course, they do have the 3-week sound truck system, and that's loud.
I would absolutely agree with that. And my one concern would be, I think there's always going to be someone less scrupulous. There's going to be someone, okay, even if we say it's all publicly funded campaigns and there can be no independent expenditures, let's say in a fantasy scenario, Citizens United is overturned. There's going to be someone who's willing to pay cash to have people sandwich board or wear shirts or do an independent expenditure campaign that way. So in principle, absolutely, that sounds great. I'm just wary that we need to make it, if it's going to be publicly financed campaigns, we need to also be enforcing that and going after the bad actors.
Yeah, I think publicly funded campaigns is great. It does level the playing field, and it allows more candidates, more people to jump in the race. Everyday voters, everyday people to really express their voice. It gives a voice to smaller communities, disenfranchised communities. And it does take out that fundraising aspect, and it's great because as a campaign manager, you get more time to spend on messaging, on really going into the issues and developing a really strong positive message and understanding of the really critical policies in the area. He mentioned Japan, but in the UK they have a shortened election cycle, and they have their elections publicly funded, and their election cycle is maybe a few months, and they're done and over with, and it's not a big deal. The more and more, though, they're seeing that the American-style campaigning is creeping in. So, echoing what Adam says, is really, really trying to prevent the bad actors from taking advantage of that system.
I would just echo what you've heard up here so far. I would also add that campaigning is a stressful, strenuous process, not just for campaign managers, but obviously for candidates. You have candidates who are already working a full-time job and/or are incumbents and have a full-time job. By taking out fundraising, you take out an aspect of where their time needs to go. And in campaigning, time is votes. They could be at work versus they could be out there knocking on doors versus they could be fundraising. So you take out fundraising and you open a whole plethora of who they could be talking to.
Do political endorsements carry any weight? And then second question was, what are the advantages or disadvantages of local political clubs? I'm not sure what they meant by that, but perhaps you could talk about getting endorsements from organized groups as opposed to individuals.
I think the value of endorsements is entirely in which audience you're trying to reach. If you're counting on winning an election based purely on Democratic Party lines or Republican Party lines or whatever it may be, then obviously the endorsement of that party is going to matter a great deal to you. But if you're looking at reaching the voters at large and really representing all constituents, then I think you're going to, then less so. There are a growing number in California, a growing number of independent voters who are quite disenfranchised and quite disenchanted with the notions of parties altogether. So I think it really depends on who your audience is, and depending on the district, you may need certain audiences and certain demographics in order to have a pathway to victory in terms of votes. And as far as club engagement, I think the most critical thing is that clubs need to be active. And I'm not going to name any names, but having worked across the country, I've seen clubs, political clubs that are essentially just knitting circles. They don't do any action, and that to me is counterproductive.
Yeah, I think endorsements, echoing what Adam said, it just depends on the groups that you're targeting, the people that you want to engage in. On a psychological level, like it helps. People really align their politics with the groups that they're involved in. So if you're really targeting a certain group, for example, the Democratic Party, and you want just Democratic voters, it really helps to engage those voters by getting that endorsement. Organizations, the same. It really aligns with the voters, but again, it depends on how engaged and how involved that organization is. And some endorsements come with campaign support, and some endorsements just come with a sticker on a postcard. So it really depends on the group that you're trying to target.
Yeah, I think a lot of the language of endorsements is very inside baseball. A lot of the times we know who to go after, but the audience kind of doesn't always care, especially when it comes to like elected endorsements. I think as far as, like Omar had mentioned, there are a lot of clubs and there are a lot of groups that are very politically active, and those are the ones who are also going to endorse you, along with give you a contribution, along with give you a team to go help you walk precincts. Those are oftentimes actually labor endorsements are a great help. And I'm going to also echo what Adam said, where it really just depends on if it is a partisan seat. When it is a partisan seat, it does help to get the endorsement of the local parties, the local political parties.
I would agree with what was just said, but I'd like to add maybe there's a little bit of experience I've had with the Republican club at the CSUMB in terms of they walked and were quite enthusiastic on a campaign with the Water Management District candidate in Pacific Grove, Pebble Beach. And that was very helpful, but it didn't bring a lot of money with it. We had to pay them actually, and to thank them for their efforts. Labor unions, I think, they have given their PACs give money, but walking and phone calling, that's also diminished in the recently. They're not as enthusiastic as they had been in the past when labor was very well organized, and unfortunately. And so basically, you have to go out and get people organized and enthused and excited. And when it comes down to it, I don't see clubs really helping that much.
Has the amount of money necessary to run a political campaign in Monterey County gone up, stayed the same, or gone down?
I think it's gone up. The costs have increased dramatically. Inflation is real, and services cost more money more and more. It's easy to think that those services can stay at the same level and they'll reach across the board easily, but it's definitely increased quite a bit.
Yes, it's very expensive to run a campaign. And I think a lot of this goes back to the issue with campaign contribution limits. Sometimes I'm just blown away at actually how expensive everything is. And not just that, but how much, because campaigns rely on voter contributions, there's this really tedious triangle that goes on between the voters and the campaign team and people who provide campaign materials, where we have to just keep asking and asking and asking for help from the voters, and eventually that hits a stone wall, because obviously there shouldn't be a need for voters to provide so much money to campaigns to get people elected. And I think this goes back to really evening the playing field. And I think when you even the playing field, you make that amount of money that needs to be raised go down.
You remember the Measure A campaign. No on Measure A, yes on Measure A. I was recruited at the last couple of months on the No on Measure A campaign, and that was $1 million to about $900,000. A lot of money in Monterey County. A district election in Monterey County for supervisor and District 4, the last time round was $600,000 to $500,000. The supervisor's race I'm working on in Santa Cruz County, 4 years ago, the loser in that spent $93,000 and the winner spent $42,000. And in this race, I have a budget, I'm estimating it will be about $29,000 for the primary.
Yes. I wish it wasn't so, but yes. Everything's getting more expensive. And as Omar mentioned, part of that is just natural inflation. The costs of everything in general are going up. But also I think as there's an increased fervor year after year, I'm seeing campaigns beginning earlier and prices going up. And so it's this ongoing escalation that I think is ultimately very problematic, and ultimately at what point will we be campaigning year-round every year and needing to donate money every single month, even in non-election years, just to have some candidates on the ballot who really represent the communities, the people, and not just special interests.
Well, this puzzles everybody. How do you encourage people who are eligible to vote and do not vote? How do you try to reach them? From the league's point of view, we try to encourage them to vote. For your point of view, you try to encourage them to vote for your candidate. But all right, we'll pick on them. How do you reach millennials?
So as a millennial myself, I think easy access to being able to register to vote is a huge thing. My whole generation uses the internet. And because of that, Secretary of State has really learned that that's where you're going to reach us. You're going to reach us by texting us to remind us to vote. You're going to reach us by texting us to remember to register to vote, by being able to register to vote online. And I think you're actually seeing a lot of increased political participation when it comes to my generation, which is something I'm pretty proud of and I'm very passionate about. Unfortunately, you haven't seen that quite hit the ballots just yet, but I think that given 4 years, especially as this younger generation, these younger millennials, the ones who are protesting gun violence and protesting the NRA, come into voting age, you're going to see that skyrocket.
Well, 2 years ago, I think there were very excited young voters voting for the first time, and they had the mantra "Feel the burn" for Bernie Sanders, and I think now they feel burned, that they didn't succeed at that point. And in fact, in the California primary, it was almost conceded. The announcement was, well, Hillary, not Valerie. Hillary was called the winner before the polls opened, unfortunately. Young people are running for office, and young people are getting involved. We have young people, running for city council. In Seaside, Kayla Jones won. I just read in the Wall Street Journal about this 6-member majority in Charlotte under the age of 38, including the mayor. Millennials, they don't want to be called millennials, by the way, turn out at the 49% level versus the most likely voter, 45 and above, at 69%, the baby boomers.
So in past campaigns that I've worked on, mostly already years ago at this point, the discussion was sometimes had that, oh, no, we're not targeting millennials because they just don't show up and they just don't vote. And as a millennial, that was very difficult for me to deal with and to work for. I am glad to see that there is a rise in it, and I think they need empowerment and they need help. I think that there is a rise in passion in young people, and they want to do something, and they want to address the problems they can see, because it is their future. But in many cases, I'm also finding that they don't know how. And so I think it is important for us as campaign managers, but also for all concerned citizens, to really help empower and get them engaged in meaningful ways, and help them become more active citizens in that respect.
Yeah, and to kind of hit on what Valerie was talking about, automatic voter registration is amazing. It reduces a hindrance to voting. It makes it easy for people to vote. They're automatically going to get their ballot, which increases the likelihood that they're going to actually fill that ballot out. And to hit on what Adam was saying, you want to make it as easy as possible. You want to reduce those hindrances. You want to reduce the cognitive load that it takes to actually think about registering to vote and voting and getting engaged. And I think voter registration, automatic voter registration is key, but also going to where they are. You want to go to them. You don't want them to come to you. You want to go to them. You want to talk to them. You want to encourage them. You want to reduce the barriers that it takes to actually get involved in politics.
We'll do a little closing statement from each of you. Let's say, Jim, say like 90 seconds. And while you're gathering your thoughts, who would have guessed this? But Loretta Fisher has something to say here.
No, this is just a little experience that I had in Caracas, Venezuela, where Glenn and I were in the Foreign Service. And Glenn, as political officer in Caracas, Venezuela, would often be the one to introduce speakers who came to talk to the public. Of course, usually they were politicians from the US or senators or whatever that came to talk to their country down there. Well, so one particular event that Glenn and I remember very well was that this American started talking, and the Venezuelan who was doing the interpretation for him said in Spanish. Now, my husband could understand this, but the guy who was giving the talk didn't understand it, of course. The guy who was interpreting said, all Americans begin their talks with a speech, with a joke. They always want to have a joke at the start of the speech. Unfortunately, jokes don't translate very well from English into Spanish. So we're just going to pretend that this man told you a joke. Now, everybody laughed. So everybody laughed, and the poor man who talked had no idea that that had happened. I just thought that was amusing.
Thank you, Loretta. Okay, closing statements. We'll start with Alex and then go to Adam, Omar, and Valerie.
I think we've all tried to insert a bit of rationality and reason and information in it this afternoon. And the bottom line is, I don't think that the voters vote rationally and don't vote with much information, no matter how much we put out there and how much we confuse or how much we enlighten. And so I'll go back to my original statement is that, I'm apolitical, but I watch the talking heads, I get angry, I get over it, and I think that maybe that's the value of our democratic society is that we're able to have this cycle every couple of years, every 4 years. The school district elections, special district elections are not being held in odd years anymore. and which means that we have feast or famine as campaign managers, maybe. Of course, you're in the cannabis industry now, Valerie, yes, non-profit, or green gold to come. I still have that bit of snark from the newsroom. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak today.
If there was one thing that I would hope, not just for us here in this room and us here in Monterey County and really just all over the country, I think what we've lost is and people throw around the word civil discourse all the time, but I would take it a step further. I think we need to take on difficult discourse. It doesn't really do us a lot of good if we talk amongst each other and everybody agrees and it's an echo chamber and hoorah, we all feel good. We need to take on the difficult conversations. Speaking to that family member who has an opposing viewpoint from us, speaking to the neighbor who has a different viewpoint, speaking to someone, whether they're young or old or anything, who is apathetic, and trying to communicate to them why we are passionate and why it matters and why it affects them, so that maybe they can develop their own passion for this. So I would say that thank you for the dialogue we've had here today, to my fellow panelists and to all of you for listening. And I hope we can carry on dialogues, not just the easy ones, but also the difficult ones.
I'll keep mine pretty short and sweet. Thank you very much. Thank you for the panel. Thank you, panelists, for engaging in a really thoughtful conversation. Thank you, everyone in the audience, and the League of Women Voters for having us and allowing us to present our perspective on campaigns. I think it's really important that that campaign consultants and campaign managers get to speak and talk about how we do our job and what's really the nuts and bolts behind a campaign. Because a lot of times there's a perception that we're the kind of for lack of a better term, the shady people in the background. And if being up here and talking with everybody, we are genuine, honest, and hardworking people that are really passionate about what we do and passionate about difficult discourse and having those difficult conversations and spreading the message. So thank you again for allowing us to give our perspective.
Thank you guys so much for putting this on. Like Omar said, it's really nice to be able to talk about our field and our craft a little bit. I think shows like House of Cards and like West Wing kind of give us a bad name. We're not very sketchy. We're just humans, and we vote just like you guys vote. And voters vote with heart. And I think that's something that there is a misconception that is no longer in politics, that's no longer in local politics. And I think that all four of us up here, work to prove that wrong, to prove that there is heart in these candidates and that there's heart in politics and that we care about this county. Thank you.
Let's thank our panelists. And I'm sure they all brought business cards if you want to pick one up. So.